whereas individual. Hello, everyone. All right. The title of tonight's episode is Liberation of the Collective Unconscious. And so the thought of a sort of collective intelligence came into my mind. You see, let me say it like this. When you look at the unconscious, the noun in the dictionary, like I have the definition here, it says the part of the mind which is inaccessible to the conscious mind, but which affects behavior and emotions. For our collective species, we can say what we have seen, the history we see is only the conscious history. And the ability of the civilization we see, it's the only conscious aspect of it. So same way that we can see that we don't have access to a part of our mind, but we know that there is more to it. Similarly, we can say for the collective view, if all human beings were in the alignment of one vision, or one vision development, what that means is that there's this very interesting anime show called Attack on Titan. And for me, like, sometimes I enjoy watching anime, but for me, the concept was the character. And I realized if that was true, if the reality of that movie, of that anime film was true, it would be as if a world where all human beings would just be very decent to one another because there's greater dangers about. So what I'm saying is that kind of one of those Independence Day situations when, for example, some other extraterrestrial force is attacking humanity and we have to all suddenly be like, holy shit, we can't fight anymore, we gotta fight this bigger threat. So in some sense, a sense of union, a sense of unity in the challenges of the unknown that appear for our civilization or for the knowledge it has developed. So when I say liberation of the collective unconscious, well, we start off from the conscious. Right now, as I'm speaking to you, this is my conscious moment, And I noticed that in its dynamism, for me, it's the concept of liberation and the concept of a collectivity is the ultimate challenge. That means imagine you get to a point where you've attained a sort of success. Then after you basking for years and years, you begin to see that your greater identifications with existence is your tribe. And your tribe is pretty much at first the communicative aspects of your species. We as creatures, not all people on this planet are people who choose to express vocally. Do you know how many people right now are waiting for opportunities, waiting to win the lottery? These are people who are found in a game where they're just hoping to get that little bit of hint or something that advances it. So what I mean by that is that individuals are occupied either by their own game, or they're occupied by a game that connects to the vision of the species. So what I mean by that is, this is the situation, guys. It's not handed to us in a plate. It's like on a platter. It's not. Existence is one of those things where just like Michelangelo, he saw the angel in the stone and set it free. We, in some sense, see our species, and then we sculpt its next steps. And everybody is a part of this. If you do it, if you don't do it consciously, you're unconsciously contributing. And so my relationship with my mind is actually a relationship with the known and the unknown. That's pretty much existence. So all the stories of your life have a known dimension and an unknown dimension. If you begin to claim that you know everything, if you just command, like you expect the outer world to align to your inner world, you're going to find turbulence. And if you only want the inner world to align by the outer world, you'll also find turbulence. This is why the Buddha spoke of the middle way, that in situations where chaos and order are present, don't necessarily identify. Rather, be that watcher of the moment that walked by. You see, there's an aspect of your intelligence, just like how in ancient Vedanta they say two birds on a tree, one is still and silent and has never moved from the beginning, and one is just constantly working non-stop. I think we have to be mindful of the ways that the human being layers itself in thought, and how those thoughts end up having a more profound significance in the decision making of the conscious moment. So, what I mean by that is that right now, pretty much, let's say I'm sitting on this chair, and let's say we start from this moment just watching, right? So, what I would say is that I either physically have the opportunity to move and go do an activity, or I can sit and then my mind begins to move. And if you notice, guys, I've noticed this, I've paid attention to this, like, and for now, I'll claim it as a theory, like I'll share it to you or present it to you as a theory, but in actuality, it is the notion that, for example, when you're doing a physical activity, you are doing it from a moment of stillness. Some of the most reflexive things, my reflexes, my just, when I was younger, I would play football and soccer, and in that game, I would have these flows of dribbling, okay, and those would occur in a way where as if prior to the knowledge, the unknown moves. So my relationship with my knowledge became a relationship with my known presence, my known personality in the presence of the unknown. And that is the study of self. Or in some sense, primarily its subjective aspect. You see, the thing is, when we're creatures that can get bored, that's our inspiration of innovation. When we have a sort of emotional response to the images presented. In the Diamond Sutra, there's a quote that says, "Keep your mind alive and free without abiding in anywhere or anything." And when one wonders of a state attainable based on that description, one begins to see we are creatures evolving in an individual way. As if we are right now, all our species has evolved to a point where we're just curious about updating ourselves. We start off with the individual, and the individual finds itself in a group, And this group wonders about the beyond, and at the same time realizes the moment there are dimensions, there are wars in those dimensions. You have separated intelligence into certain ways of acceptance. And that is the problem with belief. As if you don't see the next most brilliant vision of beauty is the new, is the presence of novelty and its direction. That means, believe it or not, the greatest leaders never thought themselves to be leaders. They thought the vision of the momentum of where the civilization was at to be the inspiration. In some sense, we are extracting purpose, just like how Michelangelo saw a rock, a chunk of rock, and sculpted an angel out of it. We are in some sense seeing phenomena, and we're sculpting senses of self and senses of world, and every day you wake up, the view on your past and future vary. We are creatures maintained through a sort of electromagnetic being infused with a biological nature. In some sense, the atoms are talking to you right now. But in another sense, the soul of the soul in the ancient mystic writings is talking. And do you see that it is one presence? And like in the Yoga Patanjali Sutras, they said your consciousness is like an orb, glass orb. So imagine you had a glass orb and you rolled it over many colored surfaces. The glass orb would go on each color and it would ascribe, suddenly it would be present in that reality. Suddenly it would be completely red, experience that realm, experience that dimension. And then it moves on. And yet the orb moves through various colors, various beliefs, various thought structures. It views many things, yet it is none. It is none, for it in its movement, it is the explanation of what the static could not capture. Many of our conclusions, this is why I say, life seems to be a unique motion. It seems to be a unique movement. That means the Homo sapiens speaks. Yet you look at many other creatures and that none of their speech has led them to such a development. We don't see lions building sky rises. We don't see, in some sense, turtles building military bunkers. We see a world where intelligence commands the design, and intelligence is actually preserved in design. And to study the unconscious means to, in some sense, see beyond your consciousness. It means to move beyond your beliefs, because the exploration of the world is the opportunity of a lifetime. And so once the spirit of exploration takes hold of you, it's very beautiful. It's because your future has become more important than you die. The easiest way to, in some sense, let go of a bad idea is to realize you never needed to hold it. For me, certain patterns of behavior, just like how an iceberg just breaks from the rest and just like floats and melts, it's one of those things where certain ideas, certain memories, they have served their moment, but then they have entered the void. For me, it became very interesting, because if there is a consideration of a conscious self, a conscious and an unconscious, it means there's a sort of fragmentation of self due to sensory possibility. That means our sensory perceptions are possible to a certain degree. Right now, the light in the room me and you are seeing is a certain frequency of the sensory spectrum. For example, a snake sees a different view. Many different creatures have a different view of this world. But why is it that our world, the world that this evolved chimpanzee has been able to see, is very remarkable? Because in some sense we are an animal that can acknowledge itself an animal, and then how can it be an animal? You see? When you look at your dog, you see, like, does this dog have a concept that it's like, a dog in a world of humanity? And you see, the reason there are different brain sizes is because nature wants to capture all angles. And this is the issue, because for me, our society is divided by its fashion. Do you see? As if how can I tell you? The sooner you see that all people are walking to the grave, then you will see the value of life. It is not just in the stories you believe. There are some stories out there in the world that if suddenly find out that there's something going on that you can get involved, you will gain some, you'll wake up. You see? So let me tell you, in some sense, we are a conscious civilization, primarily just decisions are ruling the world, which are in some sense stepping out of the minds of men. And the mind seems to be an invisible room where thoughts move at different speeds and are in some sense captured either in a snapshot or considered as a movie. For me, it's as if when you observe the moment, you're like, how is all this here? And when that question hits you, you realize it is here. It's the spontaneity of waking up to a world. It is finding yourself in a dream where the beginning is too far to see, just like its ending. We are in a world of design, and our first responsibility as conscious beings is to be aware of design, is to study design, and study design in our inner realm and our outer realm. That means wonder about how the outer world is designed. That means hold science and the arts and the crafts in high esteem. But also hold the worlds behind your eyes, allow it to be important. Because the biggest loss of creativity is creative people never attempting, never wondering if they change their behavior, who would they be? Who would they become? Lao Tzu tells us, this Chinese philosopher from like, I don't know, 1,000 years ago, he said something like, you gotta let go of who you are now to suddenly see who you will be. And so we have Henry David Thoreau, this American poet, this sage from another part of the world, saying it's not what you're looking at that matters, it's what you see. For me, I transformed just like a caterpillar transformed in a butterfly in this lifetime. I went from being just a personality, just thinking I am a thought, directing a body. I began to see no. The universe is watching the whole show through my eyes. And so the liberation of the collective unconscious becomes when there's a transparency through the recognition of, just like that glass orb state of consciousness, as if you step out of the unconscious and the conscious dynamic. So no longer chaos and order hurt you, for simplicity and complexity have just become phenomena. You find yourself alone, but you also find yourself in a loneliness of the gods. You feel like you are the sole origin of your mind. You feel you are the god of your subjective realms. You feel you are in the moment's command. So that's the power of free will. It allows you to see. We may be like, when you look in the mirror, I mean, sure, you see your physical existence, yet you cannot deny that what is looking out through these eyes is not just atoms. It has a sort of rhythm, pre-rhythms within it. You know, and I find that one of the only human beings I've noticed that has been observant enough to get here is, to get to this point, is Noam Chomsky. But I feel he also he walks very cautiously into the unknown realms of intellect, of the unknown realms of the mind's origin, of being able to be a mechanism or a sort of system of knowledge. I was watching this Noam Chomsky. I'll put the link in the chat at the end, and it was Michael Foucault or Foucault. in some sense, having a conversation with Noam Chomsky. And so Noam Chomsky dived into this notion that there's a sort of creativity in our human nature that is as if allows us to be able to learn language in very unique ways. And then Michael Foucault responded in the sense that there are obstacles to seeing truth, as if the mind is designed to see truth. This French philosopher was saying to Noam Chomsky. And he's also one of my favorite philosophers, both Noam and Michael Foucault. I feel like, anyways, like it was an incredible video. But the whole notion is that Noam Chomsky was kind of suggesting that it seems that there are biological roots to how we have this potential to adjust to certain systems where our response to them in some sense is a sort of science. Somewhere in those lines. And the obstacles that appear to in front of truth, as if this mind made to see truth finds obstacles, and so its searches in some sense are flawed from the beginning. Michael Foucault was kind of suggesting that. Yet, I find that consciousness is attributeless. Because what are its attributes are in its view. And I find that what many people have conceived to be the afterlife is how there is a sort of mental dimension to your existence, a sort of subjective dimension to your existence, and in this subjectivity, it's not as if matter can originate, but it is so subtle that in its subtlety, thoughts appear. And these thoughts appear as if this biological apparatus of ours is a sort of multidimensional antenna, as if our senses allow us to see, as if instead of you having 5 individual senses, imagine there's 5 dimensions of your existence, which each sense alone by itself is like that body of yours, that body of data. Because the mind does function on data, as Noam Chomsky was saying. He was saying that like a child starts with little data, but suddenly can turn that little data into such sophistication, into sophisticated data. So for me, the liberation of the collective unconscious, it's a suggestion that the individual responsibility that is inspired by a personality that is seeking a sort of ultimate story to follow in for humanity's sake, as if we cannot have new responses of order to that chaos. As if I remember I walked in the garden and it was this very beautiful garden and people were like, this garden is, it was in Iran somewhere, and people were like, such a beautiful garden, but I would see dried leaves on the ground. I would see the temporary aspect of beauty. This is kind of rarely said, but there's a sort of aura of beauty that arises in the being once they find themselves no longer resisting how they are naturally being. And you understand your individuality works better if it aligns to meaning and concepts generated out of its direct experience, and also with a consideration of others. As if once you have taken care of yourself, you take care of your family. Once you have taken care of your family, you take care of your community. Once you have taken care of your community, you take care of your planet. Once you have taken care of your planet, now you become a galactic, you attain galactic responsibility, universal responsibility, a story that is beyond the stories of man today. A story that incorporates this, allows the celestial to have a platform to land, but a platform to land in the minds of men, in the subjective spheres of our own individual worlds, trying to reach out to, in find a certain commonality. Because for me, I can care for the world in an instant, and I can also not care for it in an instant. Because I have noticed nature changes all the time. Yet where does the command come? Where does a sort of need for, like, there's something in me. I'll tell you this. Some people think that I kind of sit down and I write these talks. I don't. For me, words are the effect of a very profound cause, and that cause is a sort of vision. It's a sort of instantaneous knowing aligned with seeing something, as if like nobody can. It's like you don't need to think about how to explain the Mona Lisa when you see it directly, and and your direct experience, in some sense, gives you access to pure sensory data. So I'm saying pretty much our civilization values the outer life and the material life of us as beings more than our inner lives. That means there's many systems in society that will come across to young children in the future as brutal machines. Just systems of behavior that right now we're accepting normal, but for the future generations, they're going to be sensitive to it. And that's just how nature works. The next generations are see what we could not. And so our task is to try to reach as far as we can and then pass the torch. Because what else is there? It's the game of humanity to keep the lantern of our existence alive in the memory of the cosmos. So I'm pretty much that guy saying that I jumped from many different beliefs and structures of thought, different views. There was a time I was just seeking visual information, visual truth. There was a time where I was seeking auditory truth, as if I tried to, through listening, kind of find out what this intelligence is. And then I wondered about all these senses, and then I began to see as if we are in the game, where it's as if there are designs already here before us. And so if there is existence expressed, there comes the responsibility for the new existence that appears to observe that. In the Sufi Dervish tradition, in the Sufi mystical culture, they follow something they ascribe that the Prophet said, but many people in Islam also disagree with its authenticity. But yet it has conceptual value. And so it's called Hadith Qudsi, something like that. And I just said it in how like a Persian guy would say it. And it says that it was as if this truth that the Prophet spoke. And I'm just relaying information here, guys. I'm not trying to criticize any sort of religion or anything. I'm just trying to share a view. In that statement, it said that it's as if God's attitude towards life was that I am unknown. I was unknown, and I wanted to be known. And as if the effort of this whole universal sector is to, as if from the unknown, generate knowing. And it generates knowing in an individual way. As if the trunk of the tree suddenly begins branching. As it begins branching, it begins, in some sense, creating many universes for different birds to build houses on. Even though the builds are not from that tree, yet it creates a symbiosis between the terrestrial and the extraterrestrial. Between the visible and the invisible. Between the known and the unknown. And so liberation is attained through a sort of self-awareness where the collective self is no longer suffering. And that's the primary difference between the concept of a Buddha and a Bodhisattva. A Buddha is just that guy who's like, all right, I want to get enlightened, yay. You know, I freed myself, that's it. But the Bodhisattva is as if the Bodhisattva has seen the truth of the fullness of the world. It is endlessly just existence shaping itself, just changing in shape. It's a great happening. And the being also has seen the changeless, the emptiness, the truth of space. So one can say outer space is the observable universe's unconscious if it has not been explored. And so we find our subjective self to be also in a world, in a subjective realm. That means there's two ways you're standing right now, or sitting like I'm sitting right now. But there's two ways. One way is your physical way, the other is how your attention administers itself through a subjective significance. Rabindranath Tagore has this quote. He says, "You cannot cross the sea by merely staring at it, and we cannot penetrate the unknown dimensions of life until we, in some sense, choose to engage." And the greatest way, the greatest inspiration, even it was in like Attack on Titan, like I remember seeing a scene where this main character's hand is shaking because he's scared, you know. And then his friend comes and says, "Tell me what you were thinking in a moment when you weren't scared or you did something heroic." And the guy suddenly realizes there was a dream to live for. The mind discovered a future that it could enter. Um, the acceptance of our inner reality does not need to be only uh, confirmed through objective evidence. There are many ways you consider yourself in thought that has nothing to do with how the physical reality is placed. Right now, this table is here. You know, it has nothing to do with if I'm in my mind visualizing, like instead of planets orbiting around the sun, tables or you see, the mind has a sort of animative quality. This animative quality, because it observes the visible, finds itself to be beyond and hence considers itself in the domain of a new dimension, in the domain of a new way that reality can move that it hadn't moved before. And we have to be very mindful, as majorly in agreement. You know? Imagine you were rejected from many ways that thought wanted. Okay, thought wanted to move for you. That's what I want to say. But let's not start there. Let's say that in this moment you found a wonder to question the origin of the story of existence. That wonder will in some sense be a moment expressive in two ways, where in one angle you see the unknown, but in one angle what you know is a world of its own. Do you see? And so for me, scientists, and in some sense any human being who's in some sense walked with the vision of exploration, the spirit of exploration present, any person who's wanted to penetrate the veil of the unknown, they don't meet their expectation, but they see much more than they saw before. One thing you realize is that the physical reality doesn't have to listen to the rules of your mind. And violence occurs because the person is more convinced of the world only they see, and they're acting based on that. And so for me, wisdom is found when you, in some sense, are observant of not only the kind of self you see yourself as, like if throughout the day you're just thinking about like what you're gonna do, what you're gonna like wear or how you're going to look or whatever. You just don't think about that. You realize that there's also greater structures at work. Many people are in certain bubbles of safe havens where they never need to question beyond what they see, because what they see is just enough for them. It is a world on its own. And so for me, I notice this because at any time you talk to somebody else, you begin to suddenly notice when they use words, they don't use them the same way as you. So to some degree, what I'm saying is like we are temporary creatures inspired by an eternal vision to continue the value that we find in our species in the eyes of the future. That's where we find ourselves. And in the present moment, we choose the stories we want to live through, the stories that remind us that there's more than bodies here. When the minds of men dream, when the body is inactive. The world is so unknown that if our economy just was aligned, all the businesses were in some sense they were forced to align to some sort of contributive collective picture, then as if people's daily jobs would have value. This system of everybody doing their own thing and just giving a bit to charity is a failing system. I mean, it's better than nothing, but it's a failing system. It's a failing system because rather than individual points shifting, changing their approach, they're continuing the same approach and then just giving 10% of, to the other approach. 10% of their attention to the other approach. I find the most helpful question a self-aware being can ask is that in this moment, what is the known and what is the unknown? How do I define these ideas? How do I engage this existence? And so where is the borders of my fear? Where is the edges of my despair? Where is the limits of my dreams? You see, study this. You have been denied. You have been denied the wisdom of yourself because you have been obsessed by a society that others have built for you. It's the same mentality as kids. Like in some sense, I'm ashamed to admit this, but I guess it was a part of my life. I'll say it. When I was in like grade 10 or something, I still had not understood the value of my intelligence. I was one of those kids where I'm like, okay, let's be street smart. Somebody has the answer. This is school. There's university. There's bigger things. So, okay, let me just copy the answer. Let me get access to an answer other has provided. I was like that when I was younger. But suddenly when I understood the value of an original moment, the reason we don't see many creative people, the majority of the civilization should be involved in creative action. Yet their creativity is limited mainly to past structures of validity. As if a creative person doing something that the others cannot accept is automatically strange. Yet there's a creative impulse within all beings. We create the day in some sense. At the end of the day, when you're sleeping and closing your eyes, when you lift off towards dreamland, before that, you're suddenly in that state where you're like, oh, what a day. What a day. What kind of day was today, And you see that spectacle of subjective observance is your creation. And so it's as if the problem with the world is that man thinks he's man in the mind of God. And the mind of God has nowhere to go than to be man. For that is the next fruit of the tree of life. It is self-awareness was the invention of the unknown. So the pillars of the knowledge of our civilization, their foundations are in the unknown. They are just like how you look at a tree. You see the fruit, you see the tree. Imagine the first person ever in humanity like studying a tree and figuring out a tree has roots. That person would look at suddenly and notice as if the whole structure is preserved through foundations that are not visible directly. And so our sensory perception is kind of like trying to hypothesize if there are roots underneath the soil, of the first tree ever seen. So what I'm saying is like, similarly, we got to step out of our subjective realm by trying to reveal its value in the objective realm. We don't have to all suddenly forget matter and be like, yo, we're all super spiritual, hyper spirituality, bro. Yeah. Like we can't go there. That we have no time. We have no time for fantasies that do not contribute to the collective vision. And those inspired by knowledge, you will face chaos and order, and those inspired by the unknown will just become the watchers of the world for change. You have to evoke the vehicles of intelligent thought. You have to evoke it. You have to spark it, just like how the caveman took two rocks or something and slammed it together, or did something. Suddenly fire was sparked. Do you see? So similarly, right now, if you're someone bored, or you feel there's some sort of limit or limitation in your life, or you just feel your life is not moving fast enough, the notion is to study the speed of the appearance of the animation of thought that filters your free will. So think of it this way. The spiritual guy acknowledged that he had a spirit, and he had this idea that the spirit evolves. It moves in a direction. As if the soul is growing into manifestation. The seed of consciousness planted in the biology of nature's design. There are moments that I experience, if I was to dive a bit deeper into what I consider to be the creative origin of our intelligence. For some reason, and I think it can be related to genetics, but it can also not be. And it's just this idea that we are naturally designed to constantly, from the beginning of our life to its end, view the moment as self and world. And our whole collective species philosophies orbit around this central idea. The self and the world. Either the world is being the self, or the self is being the world. That's the idea of the mind and the body. Yet the unknown observes beyond the findings of knowledge. The unknown will forever be unreal. It is like, just like how you look at the visible universe and you're like, oh my God, there's billions and trillions of stars and galaxies and whatnot. You're like, oh my God, this existence is vast, this universe is big. Similarly, the unknown is as big. The unknown, what you can see, is even bigger than what you can see. And during all this, what you can see is even temporary. It changes. So for me, life is kind of like we're travelers here. We are eternal moments painting temporary lives. The same relationship you find with God creating man is the same relationship the idea of you has with the ideas it generates or what it receives to express. So just observe the brilliance of subjective ability and objective ability. Your free will, what you're considering the free will of your moment, can administer itself through conceptual shape, which at first comes through images and language, but it can also be like you find your other senses by exploring the edges of the senses you have now. Frodo had to step beyond the point of his discovery of how big the world was. He had to leave the Shire. You have to leave the belief of a changing world to see how it changes. The unknown makes you humble. It makes you not speculate, not assume too much knowing. It makes you kind of flow with life because it is too big to articulate as just one bubble of it, awareness. As if I remember there was this author who, in some sense, the Zen author, this American Zen practitioner, who he said something like, "We take a handful of sand, and we call it our world." What he means is, as if, imagine there's so many things you can know, but what you know currently is what you have reached for. You only have to work hard if you can't see the bigger purpose beyond the effort. And the bigger purpose for many people comes through at first, like, you care for yourself. But once the self is satisfied, you begin to feed the hunger of the collective. And the hunger of the collective is an evolution and advancement beyond the technologies of now. And technology is a response to the environment. And the environment is as valuable as the people in it. And the people are as valuable as they can acknowledge their natural being and what comes across to them as unnatural. Because the moment you accept the unnatural, you are in an illusion. If I took a wrench in my hand and suddenly I was like, I forgot that wrench wasn't a part of my hand, that would be an illusion. Me thinking the wrench is a part of my hand, when it can be instantly let go. And you can see that some people, I find especially atheists, to fall into this category where they feel they have been deceived. They feel they have been lied to. And they diminish the value of metaphysics and philosophy because they are still caught in the response to how they were deceived. As if for many atheists, it's like justice. For them, what they're doing is like they're being heroes of a sort of justice. Yet, they are also limiting how we must understand the unknown. Imagine all the physical problems of our species, all the poverty and everything was satisfied. We had a sort of unknown, unspeakable, unique world peace. For me, the greatest thing that I could tell people is that just for yourself, imagine what the day after world peace would be like in the future. Imagine, like, even it could be now or whenever. Just imagine how a sort of efficient collective vision can be expressed. Liberation occurs when the illusion's existential value is no longer observed. You are a creature of attention, and or in some sense, your attention is being a creature. As your attention is being your creature, your attention is the presence. Your presence is the commander of your personality, and your personality, oftentimes, believe it or not, this is gonna be incredible. Like when I found, like this was an incredible revelation for me. But your oftentimes how you think you're a person has to do with how your subconscious is responding to the environment. That means as much as we shape the environment by building towers, we also shape the world also shapes us or has shaped us. So just like in that anime Attack on Titan, it's pretty much a group of people living in a world of chaotic giants and having to allow humanity to continue, some story like that. The heartbeat of humanity must be protected. And its greatest challenge is time and how it chooses to perceive time. Time, believe it or not, is valuable, but only in a collective consideration. For the individual, if you ask an individual what is time, they'd be like, it's subjective, man. It's something I consider, you know? But you'll see, it's as if imagination stops being imagination when reality evolves. It's so remarkable when you understand the wisdom of your presence. When you see that your mind is not the issue, for the issue is as temporary as the solution. You free yourself. You hear God's heartbeat echo all over the universe. Meister Eckhart believed the mind of man to. When you attain this state of attention or attentiveness where you suddenly begin feeling, wait a minute, maybe the idea of me is really a sort of clothing, subjective clothing I'm wearing over an unknown phenomena. And when you see you're an unknown phenomena, you suddenly see like mental subject, like the freedom of your mind is actually how much freedom the character in your story of life has. And you are telling yourself a story of life right now. I am too, because we need it for the linguistic dimension, like we need it for language. You know, what we consider to be a personality, if you look at it linguistically, is pretty much various archetypes or various moments without a person existing, as if the personality is various images just choosing to take a shape, like various drops of water, rain on the front window of your car suddenly merging and becoming a sort of position. So one can say it is the integration, the inspiration of the integration of a subtler dimension that suddenly there arises the subjective personality of the being. There is a sort of evolutionary advancement going on. We find ourselves as free as the concept of freedom is open to us and how far we look into it. That means if you right now ask, what is freedom? Every moment of your life, you're like, what does freedom mean? You will see it as the opportunity. It's an opportunity. I could right now be doing something else, but I'm choosing to do this because I thought this is the opportunity of the day. Because every day whether we like it or not, happens once. And so this is the value of art, to try to preserve something from the past that can echo into the future, because it could help. Once the being lived for its world, and even though it lived many years, not feeling as if the world is acknowledging the being, in the moment of confrontation, suddenly the forces of the world were embracing how much that personality construct learned to abide by the unknown natural phenomena that occurs. And so your subconscious becomes a bridge to, in some sense, being able to land the state of being and being the sort of pilot of your consciousness where your attention finds itself having the greatest allowance because it has the responsibility of a universal moment in its hands. Responsibility automatically brings views of capable views of yourself, for there is no other choice. The animal is a visionary animal. That means it is directing its free will through visions. Your body, your stomach needs food, your mind requires vision. And you'll get bored and you want to see more. And so life will eventually become a place, once I predict this, that in the future there's going to be multidimensional renaissances. There's going to be renaissances where creative flows from various dimensions are find a sort of integration and interconnectivity and to contribute to one point, to the universal view. As if no longer people will be creatures of names, creatures of nations and ideas and symbols. We will all acknowledge a universal presence here. And then we will smile at the future we will build. Because again, seldom it is said, you have to build paradise on earth. And that's what happens when, for example, Steve Jobs builds an iPhone and you're just chilling somewhere and you can check something online. In some sense, a sort of paradise has been allowed that was not accessible to our ancestry. And I think it just happens in all kids. All kids, in some sense, when they're super young, they want to please their parents. Even the youngest and most evil-natured child, at some point, because it doesn't know anything else, will follow the program of the parent. Will be a loving child, for example, to a loving parent. Yet this structure changes. And so for me, I remember like in 2014, I think, like when I'm in existence where its subjective realm is self-acclaimed and self-ignited, but its objective realm is in some sense the world that it finds itself, that it did not create. So the value of the world is your creation, but what the world is not. So the value ends up becoming your subjective realm. It's the meaning behind the object, which is in your mind being the moment. And then as your mind is being the moment, your awareness is oscillating between being a body that has a mind and being a mind that is projecting a body. In some sense, for many people throughout the day, they will feel like a body that has a thought, and they will feel like their thought is moving their body. So I find that eventually in our global community, I think in the next 100 years this will happen. We will begin valuing to universal personalities. And the people who were corrupt in the past, who still have an influence, they're going to get bored. They're going to get bored in their ultimate mission or agenda or whatever. They're going to get bored. You're going to get bored. And you're going to see it's just a bunch of creatures on a rock. And so we try to create a game that not only we can all play, but we can evolve the game. We become the conscious force of evolution, aligning with the unknown forces of evolution. We become that surfer having to adjust the board to its wave. Similarly, you adjust your intelligence to the belief system that you require to navigate through the moment, as your consciousness is this transparent, attributeless attention just beaming, moving through this waking life. By the way, guys, I'm reaching the end of the talk, so if there's anything anybody wants to ask or whatever, you can. But what I'm trying to tell you is that your life has as much value as your world does, and your world has as much value as you've explored it. Imagine there being a telephone beside you, but you don't see it. Or let me say it like this. There's this person who has to make an important call, and he's looking for his phone, and he can't find it. He's sitting on the couch. He looks everywhere. He's like, oh my God, where's my phone? Where's my phone? And suddenly his friend comes into the room and he's like, yo, dude, have you seen my phone? And the guy's like, I saw it on the couch. And then imagine the friend says, okay, maybe you're sitting under it. And the guy suddenly in that moment wonders, where could it be? And he sees he's sitting on what he's looking for. It's as if truth is only accessible now. I don't know which other moment people can find truth. You know? It has to be present or it is not receivable. So all our illusions are being directly experienced. Your personality is an illusion that is as true as the direct experience perceiving it. The direct presence. So a sort of conceptual purity at first brings you towards the objective. But then as the stare endures, there comes the... Once you're in a state of honesty for more than 2 hours, you begin feeling subtler intuitive flows. These subtler intuitive flows reject its movement or fight its movement or resist it. When you go into nature, you can't be aggressive. If you're aggressive, you're stupid. You know, I mean, if a bear is attacking you and or you're in some kind of messed up animal situation like that, of course, that's unfortunate. You got to be, in an animal, and when an animal fights you, also be an animal. You know what I mean? So you got we as beings have a multidimensional capability of adjusting or having our personalities shift to adjust to the response the environment needs. And for me, these talks, if I was to, when I hear my talks, you know what I see? I see a person who is just sharing various flows and speeds. As if when I give these talks, they're, how can I say it? It's as if my ideas are like a sort of vehicle, and the consciousness is looking through the front window of that vehicle and is seeing where that vehicle is heading and is choosing to speed or stop based on that. So when my consciousness engages with a sort of subjective momentum, that subjective momentum is as if various views of the world, as if my eyes are that camera and various memories are just passing over it. And eventually, suddenly, the world begins to speed up to a point where the self cannot be in just one structure. So you find yourself being both a speaker and an audience of your own talk. So when I'm giving these talks, in some sense, I'm also hearing what I'm saying, and it's animating. It is evoking all that my memory can, in some sense, bring forth to paint the picture. That quote from the Diamond Sutra and that Buddhic text, keep your mind alive and free without abiding in anywhere or anything, is what the state of creative inspiration is. It is the landing platform for how the unknown can be received. As if every moment is a canvas and you choose how to paint it. And the most important thing is that if there is any sort of liberation, one asks where is this liberation located? And you see, a liberation that is not now, that is not instant, is no liberation at all. A freedom that is promised is no freedom at all. It is not freedom. It is just caution. The concept of heaven was like, pay attention to religion, buddy. And so I did. And in doing so, I began to see at the end of it, it's all human nature at work. And what moves human nature is too unknown for the human mind. And I saw, just like how the scientists say there's dark matter and dark energy, I saw that in the Islamic tradition, for example, they say, as if like some person came and asked the Prophet about the soul, and he said it is a secret of God. It is beyond your sight, yet the truth administers in all its totality. Everybody has creative ability because you're using this creative ability on a small scale to be who you are as a person. You just have to amplify it. And you amplify it based on the freedom of the world you see you're walking in. How free are you in this world? Are you a creature that is, yeah, you're too convinced by your own ideas of weakness to see your own strength? Like if you're in that state, I'll tell you this. They asked this guru back in the day, like I'll say it, his name was Shri Prabhupada, like some Hare Krishna follower of his, asked him, he says, Shri Prabhupada, how long does it take to get enlightened? And he just suddenly snapped out as if he had heard it. He suddenly heard a valuable question. And he looks at the guy and he shouts and he says, an instant. It takes an instant. And for me, the brilliance of yogic personalities was that the mystic walked in a world where, rather than rethinking divinity, like there was a miracle or divinity entered reality, reality appeared in divinity. The known appeared in the unknown. Intelligence. The acceptance of the moment is a sort of liberation, to know that it's okay to be the way you are as a design in this world, and how you as a creature have an ability so many other creatures don't, in the sense that you can create designs. We're not just monkeys making mouth noises. There's something more. And that is seen as a sort of, in certain mystical circles, was seen as the individual soul that suddenly realizes the collective soul, and the intelligence of the moment transcends identity and ideology. And it's a very interesting moment, because then you find your free will having updated itself. You get a free will update when you have mystical self-inquiry like sincere mystical self-inquiry updates your free will, because it reclarifies the world that you were living in accordance to your direct experience. I found it unique when I was like 10 or 11. I remember I was in Iran, and like in my house in Iran, and I remember I was, my mind, for the first time, believe it or not, I was dabbling, like I heard the concept of a mind. Like I had heard the idea of me, and I had heard the idea of soul before the idea of the mind. Like somehow I had heard it at that age, but like I knew about it, the conceptually what it meant, like the concept of a soul. But at the same time, I hadn't considered the mind. And so the mind for me was something between the body and the idea of soul I had when I was like 10 years old. Okay? And so the mind, I remember, like it was through some article or somewhere, this information had come to me at that age, that we're using like, what is it, like 10 to 12% of our brains. Now they say like 10 to 18 or whatever, like whatever. But like we're saying that in some sense, it became a curiosity for me, as if this invisible ability not unlocked yet. So I remember that fascinated me, and I remember I sat down and I wrote an article on the mind. It was one of those first things I ever wrote. I have the book till today, and I had so many spelling mistakes. It's ridiculous, like 3 spelling mistakes. And anyways, when I wrote it, it was the notion I brought, like the way my mind at 10 years old or 11, I think at 10, 11, like when I was like, what I thought was like, I saw the mind as a sort of this vast building that had many doors in it. And you as a person were suddenly found yourself in front of all these doors, and you had in your hand, um, like it's so many keys. And the challenge was that the way we open the greater dimensions of our mind, we access that 100%, is by finding the right key and finding the right door. As if finding, and later on, like right now, when I think about like how I thought then, honestly, I was tapping into this notion that in the clarity of the self and clarity of the world, there comes the ultimate potential of the species. And there's, it's the attention of human beings that can just reshape the planet in better ways. We can contribute. A turtle's contribution to this planet and a human being's contribution on this planet are totally different scales. As if be grateful that your consciousness is in the human species. We have to be grateful for our humanity, or we will not be fulfilled by our greatness. And greatness is that situation where, why not? Why not we see the greatest American poet, I don't know, who said, rage. Rage against the dying of the light. Thanks for listening. When I give these talks, I'm also interested in what others perceive. So if anybody wants to share something, this is the Q&A point, or just you can just give your opinion. How far can your mind see? Here, we'll put a question. Okay, I changed the question a little bit, but so guys, try answering this question I put in the chat section. What is your opinion on just like the ideas of that sentence? How far can your sight create your mind? Or this is a better question. Yo, guys, you can respond. There's 2 people watching, so you guys can respond in the chat. Okay, let me try answering this. What is the mind in my view? Well, the mind is an idea that is in view. So subjectively, it is not the view, the full view, and objectively, it is not the full view. The view we have on the world dies and is reborn many times like a phoenix. In a talk I gave, I think a few weeks back, I spoke about the phoenix within. And the phoenix within was this notion that your ideological self is constantly turning to ashes and then suddenly like a phoenix being reborn. So there's this constant uh, oscillation between existence, non-existence occurring that leads to the changing static, not static, but the changing point in between. So my mind, first I thought it's a dictionary definition, then I realized it is too dynamic. It is like riding a horse rather than reading a Wikipedia article on a horse. And because of that dynamism, that requires the engagement of an experience, and the experience is best engaged through just your simple, natural, just honest self. Like when you live like that, the world abides by by the waves of your reception of it. And I guess the most enlightening statement is be free before you could not be. Be the liberation prior to the separation of the unconscious agenda and the conscious agenda. Realize the presence of your mind and the personalities of your body. Where I can even say the presence of your awareness and the manifest forms or subtler manifest forms of, you know, yourself. The mind is a moment of self-awareness, and you oscillate between feeling you're the awareness or the self based on your engagement and the navigation of your attention. That's so far how I see it. So, anyways, guys, thanks for listening. Um, I find it kind of cool because, like, I find that perhaps no mystic has found the internet. uh, or no one in my ancestry or lineage had an ability to share their ideas online. So I kind of feel like the new, um, I did something my ancestry didn't. So thanks for listening. Much blessings and namaste.